The first thing you need to do if you're trying to get really stable footage using a gimbal is not run to the go-to, which is let's just rebalance everything. Let's just go through some more motor parameters, because there's a lot that's involved with getting this footage very steady, even though you're using a gimbal, which will keep your camera fairly steady. So in this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the top techniques that I use to get the most stable footage. I'm going to first talk about where you can identify where that's coming from, because depending on the movements and how you isolate that, you can find where your technique may be flawed or something else could be going on. I'm going to show you then one of the most proper techniques to use, which is so often mistaught in a lot of other videos on getting that stable footage. And then I'm going to show you how to practice and perfect that technique by using some other techniques that you might not think of, but will help build your muscle memory, also your mental connection to getting your gimbal footage very smooth, and it won't even require a gimbal. So anyways, let's get started with a few things first we have to be aware of is that yes, you do need to have a very well balanced gimbal. You also need to make sure that your motor parameters are set correctly, but there's a lot of other things like when it comes to the right frame rate, the camera settings, other things that could be involved, including what you're doing when you're using the gimbal itself, the weight of the camera to the gimbal, things like that could be overstressing it. And I cover that and a lot more in depth, by the way, in my course on videography for real estate. As you may know, I've got that course on videography for real estate along with other courses on doing real estate media, and I have links to all that down in the description for this video. But let's first talk about where you can identify where the problem's coming from. Then we'll get into step number 2, which is then the proper technique, and 3, how to perfect and practice that technique. So the first thing is you might notice that I do hold the gimbal on my hip if I'm not using it. And the reason being is I don't want to stress out my stabilizer muscles, because you are part of the stabilization system. The gimbal, even though it can hold that camera very steady as you're walking around, it can't do all the work. So you've probably heard about using the ninja walk, and this is so often mistaught in videos where you'll see people doing these bizarre things of crouching down and walking like that, and it just makes life a lot harder than it has to be. It's going to put a lot of stress on your leg muscles and your back. You don't need to do that to get good balance. The proper ninja walk that you really need to do, I'm going to cover here in the second step. But the first thing is it really your ninja walk that's causing the problem? Because it could be that, yes, while you're walking, something is going wrong. You could see that, but a lot of times we can't differentiate between that and panning, because a lot of motions that we do involve us walking and turning at the same time. So what you need to do first is test this. And you need to test it with walking a straight line and then test doing a pan. So what you want to first do is just walk a straight line as you normally would doing your ninja walk. And I'm going to show you that technique in just a second. But the other thing too then is take that piece of footage, no movements, no panning, nothing else going on. The next thing is to then do a pan, and to actually see then how panning is. Go back and forth a few times with your camera, and that way you'll be able to see just how it's working in panning. That'll give you then 2 pieces of footage to really help differentiate where your problems are coming from. Is it just from your walk? Is it just from panning? Is it a combination of the 2? Those will then identify things you need to then perfect as we move into here step number 2 of the proper ninja walk, and then step number 3 of the practice that will also take care of some of the panning going on. So the first thing here, ninja walk. Step number 2 is that when you're doing the ninja walk, once again, we don't want to be crouching. We don't want to be doing this funky stuff and we're looking like a duck as we're walking. None of that. All that it involves to get very smooth footage is that you want to make sure that you don't use a natural ipsilateral movement. And that's when we walk, we typically move with our arms moving and our back is then contouring with our hips to make sure that we've got good balance and our head stays steady. That doesn't work though when you're holding a gimbal. So what you need to do is something a little bit different. That ninja walk is merely going heel to toe and then slowly lifting the releasing foot just a little bit. So for instance, here I'll go ahead and line up. I'm ready to go. Double tapped my trigger on the gimbal. Make sure that I'm aligned and vertical. Then, as I do my ninja walk, I'm not gonna crouch. I might bend my knees just a slight bit. Make sure that the gimbal is loose in my arms so that my arms are part of the stabilization mechanism, not too tight, otherwise you will get some shake. And then go heel to toe. And if you notice, my releasing foot lifts just a little bit. Now that's an exaggeration of it. And that's why step number 3, when we get to this exercise, it's gonna be very important to gauge how much of that you need to do. So once again, I'm gonna walk from heel to toe and watch. Just very simple, heel to toe, heel to toe, heel to toe, and that is the ninja walk. I'm not bending down, I'm not hurting my back, I'm not doing leg day at the gym to get some smooth footage. It's just heel to toe, but then as I'm releasing, that one foot then comes up just a little bit, and that gets me then smooth footage. We wouldn't be walking naturally that way, but if you notice doing that a few times, even without your gimbal, you'll see that your body is staying just in a very straight, motionless line straight forward. Now that's the ninja walk, and also the wrong thing that usually happens is people will try this with just their gimbal. That, hey, I've got bad footage, let me try the proper gimbal walk and see how good it is. But you'll be watching that footage over and over again, and it's probably not going to show you the flaws that are coming in when you're doing certain motions. And that's where the second technique comes in, and that's that instead of using a gimbal, you use simply a glass of water. Now this happens to be empty, but what you would do is take any glass that you have, and then you want to be able to fill it up. Almost. You want to leave about a ½ inch from the top at first when you first do this exercise. And then what you can do is you can try it with one hand, you can try one in each hand, or like you would be holding a gimbal, you can try it with both hands on there. And then you just use this and then you try your ninja walk. Like this. If you're getting good, you're not getting your hands wet, then fill the glass up a little bit more so that you just have maybe a ½ inch from the top. Do it again. See how well you're doing on your ninja walk. Is this going well? Are you getting your hands wet? If you're getting your hands wet, then you need to practice that a little bit more. Once you get to the point where your hands aren't getting wet, then what you do is fill it up almost to the rim, and then see how well your ninja walk goes. And I guarantee you, you'll be looking at that glass and your hands will get a little wet. But you'll be building then a mental connection to your muscles, what's known as proprioception, and that gives you then this ability of a good neural network to know that you should be keeping things very steady. Now the next thing on top of that is keep this glass, don't worry about the ninja walk, but go back to that panning motion. Remember we identified that there could be 2 areas that are causing your problem. The ninja walk is one, how you're walking, and then also how you're moving the camera. Then go ahead and try that also, moving back and forth, panning with that glass, once again with a ½ inch gap to the top. If you get that down, hands aren't wet, move it then to a quarter and keep filling up and practicing panning. Once you get that done, now it's time to chew bubblegum and walk. You want to do both at the same time. You want to be able to do your ninja walk while you're panning. So you would be doing something very typical where you'd be walking in and maybe doing an orbit, something where you're turning around and making sure that at the same time you're doing these, that your hand is not getting wet. And this is then where it gets tricky. When you finally get to this point, you don't want to look at the glass any longer. When you're doing video inside, you won't be looking at your gimbal. Instead, this guy will be there, and yes, you will be seeing how things are being framed, but you're constantly going to be doing this. This is an exaggeration, but you'll see it's like I'm not always going to be looking at the camera, I'm going to be looking up. If I didn't, then I wouldn't know where I was going or where I wanted to then turn to. So that's important that if you have only eye-hand coordination from the proprioception that you actually build between your neural network of your brain to your muscle memory, then if you're looking at the camera, you're going to rely on that. You don't want to rely on that. You want to be able to have this come naturally. And that's where then using the glass of water test, doing that enough times where first walking, then panning, then walking while panning, and then making sure that you're not looking at the camera, that ensures that you have a better chance of then getting more stable footage as you're moving forward, doing all kinds of motions. Getting into the trickier motions too, like I showed in my videography course, when you're doing pedestal, when you're going down, when you're going up, and you're doing those motions like that, do the same thing with a glass of water. Anything where you're having a problem getting this footage smooth, then yes, you want to be able to do this with that glass of water first, and then perfect that, then try it on your gimbal. Now here's also another tip. is that after exercising for quite a while, using that glass of water, just like going to the gym after a good workout, your muscles are going to be shaky. You're going to be moving a little bit. So give yourself a break. Feel free to put that all aside for about 30 minutes, maybe an hour, or even wait until the next day to try it again. That way you're not just wearing yourself out, because you will get frustrated. You'll be, hey, I've got this down with the water, and then the next time you do it, you'll get a little shakier and boom, you'll start spilling a little bit of water. That's okay. It's all about progression. And believe me, if I can do this, you can too. If you know by now, I'm 61 years old, and if you've seen some of my recent videos over the last couple years, I've developed what's known as essential tremors. And you might have seen where my hands will shake at times during the videos that I've made. So that happens to me when I'm on site also. Now, photography, it's all on a tripod, and the gimbal does help a lot, and using the proper settings, it does too. But by knowing the proper techniques of doing the walk, doing the motions, building up the proper proprioceptive environment in your neural network in your brain to your muscles, just like I have, then you can also get smooth footage as well. It's something you just have to work on. Anyways, I hope this was very useful for you. And once again, you want to learn more about doing videography for real estate, check the links down in the description of this video.